Hello y'all, this is actually the prologue to the video. It might be a little extensive, but it's being recorded after the video, so never mind. Anyway, the video is about AEW and their growing problem with media bias and how different factions of the media is starting to talk about AEW differently depending on the players involved. So I had completely forgotten that Bryan Alvarez and FTR Bald, aka Dax Harwood, had gotten into a prior situation back in January. So in January of 2023, Dave Meltzer and Bryan Alvarez went on their podcast to discuss some things that Dax Harwood had said on his podcast, which led to an exchange between Harwood and Alvarez on Twitter. So let's go into the first piece, which is the Alvarez-Meltzer response to what Dax Harwood said.
I mean, I've been in contact with them and everything on it, but and I guess we're okay, but I don't know. I mean, yeah. He wants CM Punk. Of course, he wants of course, he wants CM Punk back. I mean,
I'm sure he does want CM Punk back. I mean, they're friends.
Well, they're talking about Dax Harwood. That Dax Harwood wants CM Punk to return. Again, this is from January. So Dax Harwood had talked about CM Punk several times on this podcast. So Meltzer and Alvarez are basically just kind of trying to work it out. And going to start talking about what their sources believe.
Yeah, they're friends.
I never once said that CM Punk will never be back in AEW.
You know that I got your shrapnel on this one.
Of course. I never said... First off, I also never said anything negative about Dax at all. I just said there's no chance that CM Punk is coming back and working a feud with the Elite. I would go as far as to say no chance. I realize it's wrestling.
I never say never because it's wrestling.
I realize it's wrestling.
I will say that today... I would say, from what I've heard from different people, not the people who you probably heard from, but who were not particularly, they were not particularly happy at all about this. But
all I heard the other day was how unhappy people were about that podcast.
Oh yeah.
So you heard that from Alvarez. Only thing that he's ever heard is how people were unhappy with the podcast about Dax Harwood talking about CM Punk returning. Now, there is
to make right
some clips of Dax Harwood talking about what he would like to do. Now, before we get there, this is what Dax Harwood had to say in response to that conversation back on the 2nd of January. He said, "I love being talked about, but would be nice if the fellas listened to the podcast before forming views." Then Bryan Alvarez responded to absolute irony. If you'd actually listened to what I actually said on multiple shows about you in this situation, you would have never tweeted this. So Alvarez is constantly arguing the situation that they're not on the side of the Young Bucks, not on the side of the Elite, and that for some odd reason, it just so happens that they always fall on that side of the argument. But there's also some apologies that Dax Harwood put out. So let's get into that a little bit.
Theories around. The first is CM Punk is using you as a mouthpiece. He's using you as a mouthpiece to try to get back into AEW and to push his narrative. Now the other one is you guys dropped all your titles because you're going back to WWE. So I'm not sure how those two things work together, but the question is, Dax Harwood, future of FTR. All of a sudden, no titles. Don't see that many dates. What's going on with FTR these days?
Well, first of all, for the first narrative about Punk, I can give you 100% God's honest truth. He has never told me to say anything. He's never expressed to me that he wants me to paint a certain narrative about him. So for anybody thinking of that, that's completely 100% wrong. All I was trying to do was make things right. That's all. That's the only thing I was trying to do. Maybe I went too far, or maybe it's not for me to make right. But in the moment, as a human being who has a heart, who loves wrestling. I tried to make things right, and that was all. And if I was wrong for that, and if I upset those guys, or even if I upset Punk, I sincerely apologize. If I upset my office, I sincerely apologize. If I upset anybody else who's letting Dave Meltzer know that the locker room is upset with me, if I upset that person, I sincerely apologize. That was not my goal. My goal was to make AEW better. That's all.
So, as we see, Dax Harwood this podcast has become a problem. As people have been taking things that have been said on Dax Harwood's podcast and twisting it, turning it, and whispering in the ears of Alvarez and Meltzer, cause all kinds of frustration. And this is, of course, I think they probably had words before this, but this is sort of the genesis of it all, where you see Alvarez and Meltzer kind of grumbling about the Punk thing, and they're not sure, but it's wrestling, so I don't know. They're hemming and hawing about it, while at the same time claiming they don't really know anything, but they're hearing stuff, but they don't know anything. And it's this kind of confusion, this kind of backbiting, this kind of, bias within
the future of
wrestling media that is causing a lot of issues. And leads us to our video today. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. It's probably a little long, but hopefully you guys like it. And I'll talk to you guys on the other side. Peace.
Saying that I'm so amazing. If I'm Ruben, then you Clay Aiken, but second place gets nothing. So get up at this conversation. Proof the truth is you sadly mistaken. Proof I'm.
Welcome to 3 Count Commentaries. I am your host, MagMongoSlade. Friends and relatives, we have been talking about AEW and how in the tank the media has been for them. We've been talking about this for at least 3 years, 4 years tops, but it's not quite going, not as these factions have been developing in AEW. We've been seeing different, how the media has chosen to look at certain issues and look at certain people within AEW. And it's starting to become frustrating for some of the talent. So, today's video is going to be about our boy FTR Bald and his angry, well, I wouldn't say angry rant. It was more of a rant against the wrestling media. We're going to break this down, and then we're going to get into a little bit of Brian Alvarez trying to run defense for the Young Bucks, and why there's so much shading. I hate to use the lipstick alley terminology, but why there's so much shading in AEW? Because they have a playbook. I posted some of it on the community tab, but they are forbidden from publicly talking about each other and talking about their health and all that kind of stuff. We'll talk about that in a minute. But let's start with your boy FTR Bald. Now, around the time, I'm pretty sure this was recorded long before Punk made his statement about Jericho, Moxley, and Tony Khan. See my video on that, about that subject. I'm pretty sure this was recorded before that comment was made. But FTR Bald is pretty frustrated with the wrestling media and how they have chosen to cover both FTR, CM Punk, etc. So we're going to listen to about 4 or 5 minutes of Dax Harwood, for those of you who don't know who FTR Bald is. And we'll see what he has to say, of course stopping every once in a while to avoid the copyright gods.
Yesterday and the Revolution reaction that we got all puts things in perspective. But I want the fans to understand this, right? These journalists, Dave Meltzer, Brian Alvarez, even guys like Sean Sapp, who I do have a little bit of respect for, right? But all these journalists who are telling you a story, right? They're telling you a story from their living room or from their studio or wherever it is they record their fucking gimmicks from. They're not in the locker room. The people that are telling them,
Right.
They're the ones who are spinning the story. These people don't see it firsthand. They don't know if I've complained. They don't know what happened with CM Punk and the Elite. They don't really know, right?
So this is basically, he is reiterating something that I've said on this channel before. Meltzer and Alvarez, they only know what people tell them. That's all they know. So the side of the information that they have is only the side that talks to them. That's it. So they're able to spin issues. And they've been doing this for a long time. And this is a trusted journalistic thing. Meltzer has been doing this for 40 years. If you don't talk to him, the only information he has to go on is the information that he can glean from somebody else. So that's it. Okay? The idea that Meltzer somehow is in the room, or that people trust what Meltzer and Alvarez and all these guys say implicitly, should not be real. You cannot trust anything that they say implicitly because they only get one side. And this doesn't include just one story. It includes everything that they write that cannot be independently researched or independently fact-checked. You have to take it with a grain of salt. And yes, wrestlers do occasionally get frustrated. In this situation, FTR Bald is talking about the Darby Allin promo, where Darby Allin talks about guys whining on social media about AEW and people saying that it was him. He, of course, said that he doesn't think that it's him. But, you know, the people who are reporting this kind of stuff, they don't have any firsthand knowledge, which is, of course, all true. So let's let him continue.
Told for everything. And I'm not just saying those two instances. I'm saying for everything. Sure. They only know what they've been told, and the people that tell them are the exact same people that tell them everything all the time, and they tell them that with their own agenda in mind, right?
So we already know that. You know that's true, right? You know, guys have been trading information for favorable views in the Wrestling Observer and stuff like that for a long time. We know that Meltzer, he rates his favorites a lot better, but a lot of his favorites are based off of, well, in the United States rather, off of people who are talking to him. And those people are all of a sudden underutilized, you know, more talented than they're led to believe, and that, you know, the audience thinks, and all this kind of stuff. And what do? You know, you can't, his opinion, even if it wasn't for sale in terms of he's going to exchange money for a positive opinion, it's for sale in so much as if you give him information that he can monetize, he will give you positive press. And that's still just as corrupt and just as much cronyism as anything else. All right. So I'm right now, I'm with FTR Bald. You know, him and his ironic mustache. You know, he's a bit of a Charlie Brown, but I'm with him on this one.
So,
or just a bias. Like if I had a news site and I had to put news out on Dax Harwood, do you think, even if I try to do my best to be honest, I would not try to make my friend look as good as he could? Like, these are people with relationships with people, who are friends with people. I'm talking about the journalists. They're friends with some of the wrestlers, and if, like, legit.
Now, here's the thing that is true, and that is FTR Ball's co-host. I don't remember what his name is. Sorry, co-host. I don't remember what your name is, sir. But this has been true for a while. And it took me a long time to really put some thought into it. But I always wondered why the journalists always preferred to give favorable reviews of, let's say, indie wrestlers. And then, you know, I think I was watching, you know, the Monster Factory on Apple Plus. And they were telling a story about indie wrestling. It wasn't like a long thing. It was more like a throwaway line about how indie wrestlers are a lot closer to the audience. You know, they spend a lot more time with the audience. And if you go to an indie show, you know what I mean. You know, indie wrestlers are a lot more accessible than wrestlers who are not on the indies. Because if you're not on the indies, usually you're going around and you have a contract. Let's say WWE. You're going to have approved public relations, places that you can talk and stuff like that. You can't just go do random interview for random daveswrestlingbasement.com and, you do an interview for them. Typically, they're going to want to control that kind of thing. AEW apparently too, which, makes sense. So indie wrestlers are a lot more easier to have access to because they see the media as an opportunity to spread their brand. So if the media wants to do, let's say, some kind of hit piece on somebody, or if they want to do shoot interviews, or if they want something like that, the indie wrestlers are more likely to participate. And thus, they are more likely to be favorites of the wrestling fans who consume that media. So when you talk about people like the Young Bucks, well, they've got 15, 20 years on the independents, building relationships with these people online, being accessible to these individuals in the wrestling media, and they're friends with them openly. They admit that they're friends. Almost all of them, all the time, admit that they're friends or friendly with the wrestling media. So when you're in that situation, you're talking about a great deal of bias. A great deal of bias. The media deals a lot with bias and bitterness. The bitterness part is typically somebody who, if you're upset with a promoter, let's say you're upset with Dixie Carter, there's always a willing ear in the media to listen to you bitch about Dixie Carter. They're not going to fact check what you're saying. They're not going to challenge you on what you're saying. Remember the guy who does the Kevin Nash podcast, Greg Oliver. Is that his name, Greg Oliver? He used to do those shoot interviews. Remember, I think I talked about him on this channel before. I don't know if I did a video on him or not, but he used to do these shoot interviews, and he would say, well, it's the wrestling business. He's just putting a camera in front of a wrestler, asking questions, trying to be entertaining, yada, yada, yada. To him, it did not matter if the story was true or not. All that mattered is that people bought the DVDs. That's what mattered. It's the same thing. He was just honest enough to say it. He was just honest enough to say, look, if they come up here and they're bullshitting about what they know about X, Y, and Z, or if, they say so-and-so fucked such and such or did such and such, I don't know whether that's true or not. And I'm not even going to ask, and I don't care. All that matters is that people keep buying the DVDs. Because he's a businessman. Well, the wrestling media is the exact same way. As long as you keep pitching out your $12.99, they're not going to put too much effort into knowing whether it's true or not. They're not going to look for countervailing evidence. Hey, so-and-so said this, but such and such said this. They're not looking at that. They do not care. All right. If you are talking to them, then you are right. Or at least that is good enough to print. All right. And you'll open up your Wrestling Observer and you'll get Jericho's side of the story because he's talking to Meltzer. You'll get, the Young Bucks side of the story because they're talking to Meltzer. He might not put their name in it, but they know when they read it that that's what they told him. And if you are on the other side of that issue, you're probably going to be pretty sure that that's what Jericho or the Young Bucks or whatever told him. And people have been swallowing this propaganda for 40 some odd years. And now, just now, in the age of the internet, are people starting to really kind of argue against this stuff and talk about it. Because now some of their favorites are the target. It was fine when it was Vince and Hulk Hogan and John Cena, and we can't stand those guys anyway. But now that it's CM Punk, oh, it's one of our guys. Wait a minute. Maybe we should rethink what we're getting from Dave Meltzer and all of these guys. Like, you should have been rethinking it the whole time anyway. But let's continue.
So how can you really expect, not to take with a grain of salt some of the stories because they're about their friends, just like if I wrote about you.
Right, absolutely, and whenever we started the podcast and Dave Meltzer and Brian Alvarez were saying, "Oh, everybody is pissed off at Dax. Everybody is so mad at Dax." Do you know why they said that? Because I know for 100% fact who told them, and I know why they said that.
Huh. I'm pretty sure I know who told them too. And I'm pretty sure his name is Bis Barrico. I'm pretty sure of that. I'm pretty sure Bis Barrico told this story of everybody being upset with Dax Harwood. Pretty sure. But it's not just Chris Jericho. Let's just be honest. There's a lot of guys who do a lot of whispering in the wrestling media. And a lot of this stuff is going to come out when there's a big falling out in AEW. Like, this is a pretty big falling out. But nobody has left the company and thrown a grenade at it yet. You know? Cody was the biggest person to leave AEW. And he has been very cordial. And that has kept goodwill for Cody. Because if he'd have come out guns a-blazing about how terrible AEW is, or all the stuff he had to deal with in AEW, then the AEW fans would have hated him a lot more than they do already. And a lot of them hate him already. But it would have turned into something that would have been more negative. And his return to WWE has been positive. And he's keeping it positive by not talking so much about AEW. And it's going to take for somebody else to leave. You know, like, you started hearing these kinds of comments about, you know, TNA or ECW or whatever as people left. But it wasn't until guys who had been there for a long time, people who were on the ground floor, those people started to leave. And those people started to talk, that you started seeing these issues, you know, that really kind of blew up and was able to, you know, sort of change people's perspective on the promoter, the fans, other wrestlers, etc. And AEW is getting to that point. It's certainly getting to that point, but FTR Ball is not done. So let's finish what he has to say.
Dave Meltzer and Brian Alvarez were saying, oh, everybody is pissed off at Dax. Everybody is so mad at Dax. Do you know why they said that? Because I know for 100% fact who told them, and I know why they said that. Because one individual, and I'm sure there were people upset. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying one individual, and I know this because the locker room told me, one individual went to the locker room and openly said, I can't believe he's talking about that. I can't believe he's saying that. I can't believe he's doing that. That same individual went to the dirt sheets, and I know it for a fact, went to the dirt sheets and said, I can't believe he's saying that. Everybody is upset with him because they want that narrative out there, right? And it's probably, I guarantee you, the person that I'm talking about is not the person or people you guys think that I'm talking about.
Right.
But what I'm saying is make your own assumption. How, like, come meet, like, again, like you said, come meet us at a convention or whatever, and make your own assumption. Don't do it through a dirt sheet or you know, whatever perception you want to get from a journalist.
So, hey, FTR Ball is saying, hey, look, come get to know us and don't just learn about us through the media. It's amazing how that works. How much the media can prime and change your opinion of a person that you have never met. The media can frame your opinion of people you have never met. It is not just pro wrestlers, it's basketball players, football players, even politicians. Even politicians. People seem to be different when you actually meet them. Because you'll believe somebody is the super devil until you actually meet them. Until you actually get to know them. Which is why, you know, just to dabble over into a little bit of the politics things. When I first started to hear about people, certain people, and I would hear that this person is a Nazi, they're a racist or whatever, I would go watch their content. Because I wanted to see directly from the source. Are they saying racial things, or are they saying racist things, or whatever the case may be? And then you say sometimes, okay, I see how you can misconstrue this to being racist, but here's what they're saying, yada, 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 not exactly racist. You get that people are manipulating you. And that's what the media does. The media manipulates you. It gets inside of your brain. It gives you an opinion based off of the quote-unquote facts and information that they have, which is usually just misinformation. And it gets into your brain, and it controls you to a degree. It'll have you hating people you don't know. All right. It may even have you hating yourself. It may have you believing things that are untrue for years and years and years. And I've been arguing against this. That's what, if there is a core mission to this channel, it is to get people to critically think, especially about the wrestling media. I have been talking about this. I know other people have too, but this channel was basically launched off the idea that I do not like the wrestling media. And that includes some podcasters and other kind of commentators too. Because there's a lot of people out there who do the same thing that I do, but they don't question at all any of the information that they get. Unless it's coming from WWE. Like if WWE puts out a press conference, it's this is bullshit, and it might be. But Meltzer puts out a comment, oh, well, it must be true. It's like, wait a minute. Where did your critical thinking skills, where did all that stuff come from? Where did it go? Like, you like Christian during his intros, like, where did it go? Where did your critical thinking skills go? You never stop to ask a question, you know? But it's nice that for him to say, look, come meet us, come talk to us, come get to know us, and then formulate an opinion on us. Now, I have my opinion of FTR Ball, and I say before he's Charlie Brown, you know, because I'm looking at his social media, and he does a lot of whining. He does. You know, he does a lot of bitching. He does. But that doesn't mean that what the stuff that he's whining and bitching about is wrong. It doesn't mean that he's right either, because again, it's just his side of the story. But it doesn't mean that he's wrong. There's only a couple of more seconds, so let's finish this one out.
You right now that my quote unquote complaining is coming from a place of passion because I want FTR to be the best they possibly be, but above FTR, I want professional wrestling to be the best they possibly be. And now I'll get off my soapbox from that. I hope the fans either listen to it and appreciate what I said or just fucking fast forward through this.
All right, so I get what he's saying, and I understand what he's saying, and I actually agree with a lot of what FTR Bald had to say. And then a couple of hours after this, Brian Alvarez, after the CM Punk fiasco with him calling Dave Meltzer a liar, calling Chris Jericho a stooge, Brian Alvarez has to go on his show to try to clear the air, and in some ways made things so much worse.
He was very upset about this Colt Cabana story. And he apparently believed that the story got out because the Young Bucks told the story to me and they told the story to Dave. Okay? I can tell you 100%. I did not hear this story from the Young Bucks. And Dave has said the exact same thing. He did not hear the story from the Young Bucks. And you know what's funny is...
So, Brian Alvarez is now claiming that the Young Bucks are not a source. Look, let's talk about this. Again, put on your critical thinking cap, okay? What is one of the top things when it comes to journalists? Not revealing your sources, right? It is the number one secret of journalism. You never reveal your source, which is a lot different from, academic writing, where if you formulate an idea, you have to cite your sources. Where did you get this information from? In academic writing, any claim that you make has to be backed up with sources. I've done quite a bit of academic writing. I know that for a fact. Most people, you would not be able to pass basic undergrad without understanding that you have to source your stories. If you write an essay and you make a claim in that essay, you have to cite your sources. But if you're a journalist, you don't have to cite your sources. You just have to put forth an argument. You can make a claim. You can say so-and-so said this. And then people are supposed to just believe you because you're an arbiter of truth. You're a journalist. If somebody comes across and says that's not true, you can say sources tell me, people familiar with the matter said, and then that's it. You're supposed to just believe it. Well, So Alvarez coming out saying the Young Bucks aren't our source. Come on. With your critical thinking cap on, would they really come out and say that the Young Bucks were their source if they really were? Would he actually come out and say, yeah, the Bucks told us that, but, you know, it is what it is? No, he wouldn't do that. They would never trust him again if he did that. So we already know off rip that we can't trust what Brian Alvarez is saying. Not just because he has a history of this kind of stuff, but because we know that he would never reveal a source. If he was a smart journalist, he would never reveal a source. And there's no doubt that sometimes they do get details that they can only know from certain people talking to them. But if you want to protect the integrity of your story, you might not want to put the source out there. Because if you know anything about academic writing, you put madeupmonkeyshit.com in your sources cited page, and your professor looks at that and says, madeupmonkeyshit.com, what? This ain't a legitimate source. I don't trust what this person is saying. You're quoting Wikipedia. What is this? Anybody can just put this in here. It's the exact same thing when you're ingesting wrestling journalism. Anybody can whisper anything into these people's ear. And there could be an air of truth to some of it. But ultimately, if it's not independently, factually verified, it's nothing. It's just a story that you were told. Take it with a grain of salt. But we know that Meltzer and Alvarez cannot be trusted because they would never out their friends. That's the second point. One is just a source, just a regular source, somebody who sent you an anonymous message through email or whatever. This is actually, these people are their friends. So they're certainly not going to out their friends as gossiping about their coworkers behind their back. That's not going to happen. So we already know that Alvarez is full of shit. Okay, so let's continue.
You know who I first started hearing this from? Fans! Fans were speculating about this.
Oh, God.
Fans had heard things.
God.
I realize it's wrestling, but, you know, there's a lot of fans that they're on the periphery of this business, and some are even inside, and everybody hears a lot of things, and the first I ever heard of this was from fans.
So Alvarez is saying the first time he ever heard that the Colt Cabana situation was part of CM Punk playing power politics is because fans asked him about it. That's bullshit. While yes, some people are smart enough to put two and two together, there are some conspiracy theorists out there, I am one of them, who want to put two and two together and say, you know, Colt Cabana disappeared. CM Punk is here. Those two guys, they have beef. Maybe that's the issue. Okay? But CM Punk is not going to call out the wrestling media because fans are whispering about this situation. It's only when the wrestling media start to actually give credence to it, when they are the ones that are out there putting out articles, charging for information, etc., etc. That's when CM Punk got frustrated. Again, he didn't just say, there's people out there who think I got something to do with Colt Cabana. He said, no, these journalists have said that. Not, you know, made up name bunch of numbers on Twitter said this. Not some guy on Reddit said this. Some asshole from 4chan said this and I came across it. No, he's talking about the wrestling media. So obviously the wrestling media, even if, and let's say there was no truth to it, then why would Alvarez and Meltzer and all those pay any attention to it? There's a guy out there on Twitter. I've seen him. He keeps posting this video of Alexa Bliss being molested by Triple H or some nonsense, right? He just posts this in random WWE videos. It's ridiculous. Nobody ever picks that up and runs with it. You know, nobody ever takes that seriously. That's a serious allegation that guy's making. Nobody takes that shit seriously. Everybody looks at that and says, what the hell is this guy talking about? They call him a troll and they move on. So if the CM Punk Colt Cabana thing, there was nothing to it, if the media didn't bother to entertain it, nobody would have known about it. It's just been something people whispered about on their own. But it's because Alvarez and Meltzer started to actually feed into it, and their satellites started to feed into it, that this became an issue. And now he's trying to blame it on randos on Twitter. Oh yeah, it was just like some random Twitter guy. It's the first time I ever heard of this. Bullshit. Bullshit. I'm not buying that one. No way.
And then I started asking around, and dude, I heard, you know how many people in AEW had heard this story before this story ever got out on a big, this did not come from the Young Bucks, but that's what he had in his head. And I don't know if he is blaming Chris Jericho for telling Dave Meltzer about what happened over All Out Weekend. But when I look at this, it sure seems like that's what he's saying. And man, unless this guy has concrete proof that Dave Meltzer got this story from Chris Jericho, then we are literally in the exact same position that we were in August, where he is blaming somebody for telling Dave something that, quite frankly, I don't think Dave got from Chris Jericho.
So, unless CM Punk has concrete proof that he got this story from Chris Jericho, well, he's just making shit up. Well, when you ask these people for concrete proof of anything, they don't have to provide it. We just talked about that, right? They don't have to reveal sources. They don't have to, they don't have to go through that. Trust me, bro. Source, trust me, bro. I made it up. It's entirely possible CM Punk is paranoid and saying, that's just Jericho talking. That's entirely possible. I'm not going to say that that's impossible. It's entirely possible. But what's the likelihood that he just has this idle mind and he's sitting there and he reads some crap about him online? He's like, Jericho! It was Jericho! Of all people, it was Jericho. Oh, no, actually, it was Aubrey Edwards or some shit that made it up. Come on, get out of here. Who is closer? Hold on. Let's run a simulation real quick before we get back to Alvarez and let him finish up his point. Let's say you heard something terrible about your friend, or somebody that you know. And you go to your friend with it, like, hey, yeah, I heard, something terrible about, old Mick over there. What's going on with that? And they'd have been like, you know what? I don't know nothing about that. Or, it's not true. It's not true. It ain't got nothing to do with it. Then you would have had, talked to your friend about it. Would have been told it's not true. Or, somebody's making it up. They're blowing it out of proportion. And you may have not even entertained it. So this tells me that Alvarez, Meltzer, etc., they hear this story from random third parties on Reddit or whatever about CM Punk and Colt Cabana. Then they don't ask the Young Bucks about it. They don't ask Chris Jericho, the guys that they talk to. They don't ask them about it at all. Which would have been the first fucking thing you would have done. You would have said, hey, since you guys are the locker room leaders, I'm hearing about this locker room problem. What do you guys know about it? You didn't ask? You didn't ask Jericho or the Young Bucks about potential locker room issues that could have squashed this entire story? Because Jay could have put out, Young Bucks could have told them, look, it got nothing to do with that. CM Punk ain't got nothing to do with this. It's just a decision Tony made on his own, trying to keep down confusion or whatever. Maybe he thinks that's what Punk wants, but it's not anything Punk actually doing. You could have asked your friend who knows the guy, who's in the locker room with the guy, and said, it ain't that big of a deal. But you didn't ask. Or maybe you did ask, and they confirmed. Either way it goes, you can't be trusted. This information is completely and totally shit. But you're still talking about it, though. You still entertained it, even though you couldn't independently verify it, even though you say you didn't get it from your friend. Come on, man. It ain't looking good, does it? Does it look good? Comment section, does it look good? Is this information that you can trust from people you can trust? Who do you trust? Not Alvarez, that's who.
I don't know that, but I do know that I heard a lot of details about that weekend, and I didn't hear them from Chris Jericho. So it sounds to me like history is repeating itself here, which doesn't sound to me like this is leading in a very positive direction.
No, it's not leading in a very positive direction, Brian, because you're gossiping and mudslinging about a guy. So no, that guy is not happy that you're talking about him. He doesn't want you talking about him. But the talking about CM Punk, that didn't stop. And so now we're going to move into the Billy Body, Sean Ross Sapp portion of this thing. And I don't really like either one of these guys, but this was actually entertaining. So let's talk about this for a second. So Sean Ross Sapp, he does Fightful.com, Fightful Select. And now he's putting out a story on CM Punk, you know, the return, the stuff with Moxley and all this junk. He has been in an ongoing feud of sorts with Billy Body, who is one of the wrestling journalists that works alongside Conan and Disco Inferno and all them on K100. So Billy Body decided to do something that was very, very underhanded, but something that I actually respect. He subscribed to Fightful Select, took screenshots of Sean Ross Sapp's story, and then posted it on Twitter. Absolute scumbag behavior. But, I mean, I'm a scavenger at this point. I got no connections with none of these people. None of these people are my friends. I don't like any of them. So let's read it. Let's read Sean Ross Sapp's story on CM Punk, the Young Bucks, etc. It's pretty long, so we'll be here for a while. Get some popcorn. But this is going to continue our discussion about AEW and the media. And then we're going to get into the how Brian Last and how he could have possibly got into the AEW playbook. So here's the thing. Things got cooking with CM Punk and All Elite Wrestling again when Punk posted on an Instagram story on March 23rd. Fightful had already been working on an expansive CM Punk update, but that gave us more to ask about. In the post, CM Punk confirmed a Fightful Select report from last fall that Jon Moxley pitched the idea of CM Punk losing in a quick match before their all-out match. Those familiar with the situation say that Punk had communicated that he wasn't comfortable competing in any capacity without being cleared first for the August 24th match. There had been issues regarding the creative throughout the build to the match, and Fightful had reported that there were concerns that Punk wouldn't be at the August 17th Dynamite as well. However, we're told that travel arrangements were made to accommodate Punk the day of the match, and Punk had at least floated the idea of additional reimbursement for the match, as he was working without being cleared per his claims. Now, of course, we're talking about the wrestling media. CM Punk put in the weasel words, those familiar with the situation. Those, a source. Somebody told me. See, when he talking about CM Punk directly, what CM Punk said, he says, per his claims, meaning CM Punk's claims. CM Punk claimed he was working injured, which is fact. He was working injured. That could be independently proven because we know that he had foot surgery and all that kind of stuff, and he was legitimately injured. And so Punk, Moxley, all these guys are having an issue. Fightful was already talking about CM Punk, but this gave us more to talk about. Yeah, I bet. Let's continue. We've heard subsequently, Jon Moxley and Punk have appeared to have heat based on those that Moxley has spoken to about Brawl Out. Moxley helped lead a locker room meeting in the days after with Chris Jericho, who was also called a liar and a stooge in the Punk Instagram post. Bryan Danielson also led the meeting, but wasn't mentioned, and we haven't heard of any heat between Danielson and Punk. Jericho and Punk shouted at each other after the Brawl Out fight took place, with Jericho calling Punk, quote, a cancer, and Punk shouting back at Jericho. Those in AEW believe that if things come down to a Moxley or Punk situation, that AEW would pick Moxley in that decision. Punk is also very aware of the heat on him, and the possibility of talent walking out should he return, but we haven't heard his feelings on it. Some of the heat has certainly died down since All Out 2022, but there's plenty that still remains. So now that Punk has put out that him and Moxley have heat, now the wrestling media can say Punk and Moxley have heat. Now, they didn't have a problem when it came to Jericho, right? You heard all last year about how Chris Jericho was the locker room leader and taken over since Punk had exited, and he was offended and disgusted at Punk's behavior. Again, people who talk to Jericho. But now that Punk has put out there that him and Moxley have heat, now people are kind of like, yeah, we know that now, so now we can just go out there and put this shit. People familiar with the matter said. People familiar with Moxley's line of thinking said. Nonsense. Let's continue. AEW and CM Punk have had some contact. In fact, some close to Punk claim that he and Tony Khan, quote, have spoken or had a couple of meetings, though we aren't sure of what, and if anything came of them. We do know that there was a planned meeting for mid-February that was delayed, supposedly due to Jerry Jarrett's funeral. At one point, those close to Punk believed that he wanted out of his contract without a non-compete attached. However, in recent weeks, they believed that Punk was open to returning to AEW and even wanted to. In an important note, at least one person claimed that Punk was willing to apologize for the scrum portion of the All Out evening. There was at least a lot of context absent from that claim, and specifically to whom or whether it be publicly or privately. Several people said that Punk has expressed some form of regret for aspects of that night in general. Sources said that Punk was originally considering the potential of legal action, but haven't heard anything about that being broached in months. In fact, those that we spoke with felt like there had been a productive progression in the opposite direction. However, sources within AEW that we spoke to lost confidence that Punk would be returning after the March 23rd post. Punk does remain under contract with AEW. We've inquired as to whether or not there was ever a suspension or pay docking involved, but traditionally AEW has paid out wrestlers while they're injured regardless. Punk has not responded to email inquiries about this story. At the very least, they emailed Punk about it. At least. Christ's sakes. At least they say they did. We don't even know whether they did or not. But again, more weasel words in here. But it's a lot of words to say not too much of anything. There has been talk about Punk going back and forth about whether he wants to come back or not, but nothing's official. I mean, how much do they charge over at Fightful? I think it's $5. $5, please, for your will they, won't they, we're not sure argument. Like, you have nothing, okay? You don't have anything. You just have no information. We don't know whether Punk is going to come back or not. We haven't heard word yet. But we know that they're talking. It's like, of course they're talking. Of course they're talking. These people are still in business together. This is ridiculous. He's still under contract. Of course they're talking in some capacity. All right, let's continue because now we're going to talk about Hangman. The issues with Hangman and CM Punk dated back to before their Double or Nothing match, to the point where we're told that Punk ended up having a meeting with AEW officials. We're told Punk had expressed his frustration regarding Hangman's comments during a promo that Punk believed referenced Colt Cabana and wasn't satisfied with the resolution or lack thereof. This led to him calling out Hangman months later upon his return. Those that we've heard from claim Page makes an effort to remove himself from this situation and has tried to move past it. So Punk is, Hangman's like, look, they ain't got nothing to do with me now. I'm out of here. People are starting to get suspended. People are starting to get beat up. I don't want nothing to do with this. Yeehaw, I'm out of here, right? Nonsense. It's just nonsense, right? Now Punk and his injury. As far as CM Punk's injury status, he tore his triceps at AEW All Out before the scrum. Those with knowledge of the situation said that he was hopeful he could be fully healthy by late January, but believed now he'd be able to be cleared, and if not now, very soon. There were some asking about him filming for Heels Season 2, since he posted a picture from the set recently, and that season reportedly wrapped last July. So this silly TV show that he was a part of. I actually watched a little bit of Heels. I lost interest about episode 3, maybe. it just lacked the legs for me to stay with it. But apparently CM Punk's on the show, and they're using him as a big draw for the show to keep it on the air, which I think it probably should have been canceled, but whatever. Finish your story, to quote a lisping man. Let's continue this. The true accounts of Brawl Out will likely never be known unless Punk and the Elite get together and explain in detail, which is unlikely. However, we've learned a little bit more about that situation. There were other talent who were present at the time of the brawl, but did not get physically involved and therefore weren't suspended. However, there was another production employee who ended up getting struck with a chair that hadn't been previously revealed. There were some rumors recently that Punk and Kenny Omega had a conversation a few days after, which isn't true. By then, Punk was set for surgery and Kenny Omega had already had other plans. However, Punk and Kenny Omega did have a brief conversation after the Brawl Out fight and in the moments immediately following. Punk was said to have had told Omega that the issue wasn't with him. Those that were nearby said the two were going to continue talking, but Ace Steel was still being dealt with at that point. Even those close with Punk claimed that Omega was surprisingly composed during the aftermath. Omega had been scheduled to go to Japan to do the Tokyo Game Show work for AEW, but due to the suspension, ended up taking a personal trip over there. Now, the rest of this stuff is about CM Punk in New Japan. Who cares about this? And there was no real talk about CM Punk in New Japan. So this is basically a whole bunch of nothing. CM Punk and Kenny Omega had a conversation, but we don't know what it was about. And they hadn't figured out what to do with Ace Steel yet. So, Punk was in a better mood before they started, handling his friend. They fired his buddy. Now his buddy's been fired. He's probably not in a good mood anymore. Not really wanting to participate in what was going on here. But again, look at the weasel words. Look at how they're not sure of anything. They can't source anybody. You're making claims, but there's no sourcing of the claim. But we see that AEW is becoming a very leaky boat. It's becoming a very leaky boat. And which is not a surprise. I mean, I don't want people to get the wrong idea that I'm going to attack AEW for, them not being able to control the talent and everything. I mean, this just happens. You're dealing with human beings. You can make them sign non-disclosure agreements. You can threaten to sue them. It doesn't matter. If somebody wants to talk to somebody, they will. And sometimes it's a confidant of the person who is talking that actually does the talking. The pillow talk. You tell your wife or girlfriend, they tell somebody, and then, next thing you know, it's on the internet. That shit happens. But what doesn't normally happen is that some internal documents gets out into the public, which is very interesting that Brian Last had at least somewhat of a copy of the AEW talent playbook, which has, sort of the little bylaws in it about how the talent should conduct themselves when under contract to AEW. Now, Brian Last did not post everything that he's got. I'm pretty sure he's going to, quote unquote, protect his sources too. I'm pretty sure he has some. He's a notable good buddy of Jim Cornette. But here is some of the most interesting pieces. And again, some of this stuff was posted in the community tab, so that if you wanted to see it, you could. It says talent are prohibited from making directing abusive, profane, or threatening language towards AEW. Talent and employees must maintain proper respect for AEW at all times. Offenses against AEW include verbal or other non-physical abuse. This applies at all AEW event locations, including at the arena or the event venue, airport, and other transportation modes to and from an AEW event, and at hotels or other accommodations in connection with AEW. So you can't defame the company. Pretty simple. And I think later they end up including sponsors and stuff like that. So you can't talk bad about TNT or TBS or some of their sponsors or whatever. You can't go on TV and say that one of the sponsors sucks or something like that. I mean, that's just basic business. But here it says criticism of fellow team members. Team members. Okay. AEW policy prohibits public criticism of fellow team members. Such prohibited public statements may include, but are not limited to, accusations or criticism of fellow team members or the organization as a whole, accusations or criticisms of tactics, style of wrestling of fellow team members, accusations or suggestions that certain issues consistently occur in a particular match. I'm sorry, but the last 2 points, nonsense. You can't critique publicly a team member's match. Who is that sensitive in the locker room that you cannot critique their match? Most recently, Booker T came out and basically said that anybody caught leg slapping should have been fired. Now, he still works for WWE. There's leg slappers in WWE. Johnny Gargano was one of them. There's quite a few of them, actually. You know, there's a lot of leg slappers in WWE. There's more in AEW, but there's a lot in the WWE. What should happen in the respect that Booker T criticized something that occurred in the wrestling match? He's not allowed to have that criticism. It's a criticism. He didn't even aim it at anybody in particular. You know, he didn't say Johnny Gargano should be fired for slapping his thigh so much in a match. You know, but these are very vague things. This doesn't matter, to be quite honest. You can't critique somebody's style of wrestling. What? You can't say somebody sucks. You know? Okay. Here's another one. Innuendos and indirect statements shall also be considered prohibited. While understanding that social media can be used to help advance storylines, first please check with those with whom you are working before posting. Feel free to run posts by Christopher Daniels, a coach or a member of legal, HR, or a PR team before posting. You need to run that tweet by Christopher Daniels. Ha. Ha. Dax Harwood, he has a podcast, which we started talking about here, and we used him first, where he's saying pretty much whatever he wants. So is it that Dax Harwood is somehow getting a letter every week? Hey, you can't say certain names, or please do not defame the company. You know, don't talk too much about the company. Yeah, you know, how is he supposed to run a podcast that way? It was the same thing with Bruce Pritchard when he went and went back to WWE and was still doing Something to Wrestle. Everybody noticed that Something to Wrestle used to be a top podcast. It used to be one of the top wrestling podcasts. People used to quote it every week. It was fun. And then he went back to work for WWE, and you know, Something to Wrestle came all the way down. And people were just kind of like, yeah, we're not going to get any. He's not going to be honest about Stephanie McMahon anymore, or about Vince, or about Triple H. And he's not going to talk about anything current. So what are we listening to this shit for? And that's what I would expect from like the FTR Bald podcast. It's like, okay, look at all these rules that he has to follow. That show wouldn't be anything worth listening to. And to be quite honest, there's only a couple of seconds of every show that's worth listening to. We being honest. But let's continue. It says unauthorized media engagement. So you can't talk to the media without their permission. Again, this is a normal business function. Interviews. Do not conduct any interviews, podcasts, or engage with the media without alerting or engaging the PR team. You will be breaking policy if you move forward with an unapproved interview. Anonymous sources. Instances of anonymous AEW talent being cited by the media as sources of information will not be tolerated and is subject to discipline upon a first offense. Really? Instances of anonymous AEW talent being cited by media as sources of information will not be tolerated. Is that so? Is that so? No wonder Brian Alvarez came out and said, it wasn't the Young Bucks. It wasn't Chris Jericho. Of course he's going to wave his arms and say all that stuff. Because it's prohibited by the bylaws. That's, I'm guessing, in their contract. Now, a lot of people may get the wrong idea. They may say, well, these guys are independent contracts. They should be able to talk to whoever they want to. Look, if you go work for any company, they're going to try to, no matter what, whether you're an independent contractor or an employee, they're going to say, look, don't do any interviews about the products that we make or anything that you know, because a lot of that stuff is inside baseball. It could give either the government or competitors inside information. And some companies, depending on your level of what you actually do, they don't want you even to confirm or deny certain things. You know, you're prohibited from talking about these things. You're not supposed to talk about, you know, business in public or to strangers or people who don't work there. This stuff is just all about trying to keep a unified message when it comes to the media. To be quite honest, though, Tony Khan should probably follow his own advice and run his tweets through his PR team, because he does more damage to AEW than, you know, even FTR Bald's podcast. So here's another one. Interesting. It is critically important that private, sensitive, and confidential information regarding any and all matters be kept confidential. To that point, it is essential that we address and resolve matters privately, in-house, rather than through social media or the media. Neither of those platforms offers opportunities for meaningful dialogue or resolutions. I actually agree with this. Too bad you're buddy-buddy with Meltzer and Alvarez, and these guys have been feeding these people information for decades. What are you going to do, fire Chris Jericho? That's what I want to know. You're gonna find Chris Jericho because he's been talking to Meltzer, and you know it because you know that's what he did in WWE. That's what he did when he was, you know, in WCW. And so now you're going to try to fine him for it? Oh no, what you're going to do is you're going to know that it came from Chris Jericho, and you're going to turn a blind eye to it. You're going to probably say, please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. I don't want to have to fine Chris Jericho. He may get pissed and try to leave, and then that'll damage the reputation of my company. So, I mean, this is the problem when you give talent so much leverage in the company. You know, the old Vince McMahon, the brand is the draw, not the wrestler. When you make the wrestlers your draw, then they have all this leverage over you, and now they're above the rules, right? Jericho will go on his podcast and say whatever he wants about anybody. What do you think Tony Khan is going to do? Fire Jericho? Fine him? Not going to do anything. Not going to do anything at all. But I also, before we continue, I wonder, when did this get implemented? Did it get implemented after Miro went off on Twitter? Did it get implemented after Andrade went off on Twitter? How about when so many other people have gone off and acted a fool on Twitter? Was this in place, you know, 2 years ago when Cody was acting up on Twitter? You know, or when MJF tweets out weird stuff at people? I don't know. Let's see. Criticism of AEW, which includes but is not limited to the following: comments regarding the quality of AEW's management team, other members of the roster or ownership, including our TV partners, or decision made by ownership or management, publicly accusing ownership, management, or any member of the talent roster of acting with bias or any way questioning the integrity, posting negative or derogatory, demeaning content pertaining to AEW, its owners, its partners, or its sponsors, currently DraftKings, Price.com, and State Farm, on social media. So you can't question any of those things. But another interesting bit is what CM Punk actually did about talking about his health, which they also don't want you to do. It says, the health and safety of our team is critical to AEW. AEW wants to be a place where health and safety are prioritized because it's ethical and the right thing to do. Yeah, I bet. Let's go further down a little bit. Refs now have two-way communication with production. In no circumstance would refs throw up fake X's. We're saving that only if and when needed, which we hope is never, which tells me that this is not written by somebody who is a professional in writing human resources documents or whatever. Refs are empowered by AEW's head physician to call matches they determine they need to for health reasons. AEW's head physician and CEO and general manager now have a dedicated channel in case of emergencies. Let's skip down. For stunts, spots above and beyond normal, talent will need to get those reviewed and approved by a quote safety coach and AEW's head physician. We're not trying to stop you from doing anything of the amazing things you do. We just want you to be able to do them as safely as possible. For instance, we want to make sure we have some double checking on crash pad placement, having additional refs or coaches nearby to help as needed, and having medical staff ability to have immediate access. Oh my God. Look, again, I'm trying to be charitable here. If you're working at a company, there's going to be, well, a wrestling company, there's going to be a producer. You're going to run your spots by your producer. Usually the producer is supposed to know what the spots are in other matches. So if you break a table in this match, or if they're going to break a table in the main event, you're not going to break a table in the opener too, right? They want to know what you're going to do on the show. But they're going to have a safety coach, which means there's probably a lot of rehearsal involved with this stuff. Which you would think it wouldn't be, considering how much this shit looks like it was just thought up on the fly. Okay, let's continue. Here's the one that CM Punk actually did. He says, for everyone's privacy and to comply with laws regarding protection of patient information, we ask that you do not comment on your own or another person's health condition without clearing that with the CEO and general manager, AEW's head physician, and our PR team. So you have to clear it through everybody. CEO and general manager, that's just Tony Khan. Head physician, I'm not sure who that is. So that's all very interesting stuff. All very, very interesting stuff. But how did Brian Last get this? And I'm very interested in how Brian Last managed to get this information. Of course, he likens himself to a wrestling journalist now, so we'll never actually know. But I'm pretty sure that there are some people within AEW who will be willing to give up that information. Because again, like I'm saying, it's become a leaky boat. It's become very leaky. And we're dealing with AEW having a problem. A real big problem with frustrated talents who are talking too much. A lot of media who are vultures, who are hanging around, waiting for somebody to make a mistake, somebody to tweet something that they shouldn't, say something that they shouldn't, and then they're going to pounce all over it. So, AEW is going to have a problem. All right. They should definitely revise this playbook and rewrite it, because it's written kind of unprofessionally, but whatever. All right, so that's it. AEW and the media are going to have issues going forward. And it's going to be due mostly to the fracturing rather, of the factions within AEW. Just remember, as I've said, when you see stories about, Hulk Hogan and how Hulk Hogan broke the union, how John Cena refused to do such and such, just think about who's saying that. You think John Cena is going to sit down with Brian Alvarez or Dave Meltzer and say otherwise? Like, no, this is not what happened. This is what happened. No, they're getting it from somebody who either might have been there or somebody who was whispering about it backstage. People are just making a big deal out of this stuff. And AEW did it to themselves. They're so buddy-buddy with the media. And these guys built their empire on being buddy-buddy with the media. It was no surprise that this was actually going to happen. So now I'm interested in sitting back, watching it burn. What say you? Like, share, subscribe. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace.